At the end of making and touring Caravan of Lies, Peter, Shenton, T.C. Howard and I went to Gdansk to collaborate with a dance theatre company called DADA von Wybrzeze in Gdansk, where Aurora, who had worked with us on Caravan, was a company member. And I had been working at the Baltic University of Dance, mentoring some younger artists. In 2001, I organised a collaboration between Vincent Dance Theatre and DADA von Wybrzeze Dance Theatre in Gdansk. Aurora Lubos was a member of that company, and I had been invited twice, I think, out to Gdansk to teach and dramaturg mentor on some work the 2 summers beforehand. And the second time I went, or possibly the first, I can't remember, I met DADA von Wybrzeze's artistic director Leszek Bzdul, who is a long-standing member of the dance theatre and performance culture in Poland. And we hit it off, and I seeded the idea, I suppose, of what would it be like for my gang to work with his gang to create a piece of work. And being in Poland really moved me, actually. I'd not been there before, and I wandered around the streets and was just struck by a sort of heaviness of history that you feel when you're there, and a kind of down-to-earth, get-on-with-it-ness that I recognised from Yorkshire, actually. And so that was where the idea came from for Drop Dead Gorgeous. It came from the idea of wanting to collaborate with performers from a different culture, but also wanting to look at, I don't want to say poverty, because it's a very rich country, not in financial terms, but in terms of heritage and culture. I suppose I wanted to look at history and the things that I recognised that I'd been living with in Sheffield. Sheffield was bombed in the war, and it's a mess. The city centre's a mess because it was wiped out because of the steel manufacturing. And the same can be said of the main high street in Gdansk. It's actually, I believe, it's been remade to look old, but it's actually not, because it was also bombed. Anyway, I started reading a lot about the Second World War and Polish history, and I started getting very interested in what would it be like to bring 3 performers from each country together to make something around, sounds very grand, but around the Holocaust, around the Second World War, around atrocity, around hope. And so we got together in the Wybrzeze theatre in Gdansk and did some research, and then I invited Leszek Bzdul, the director, Aurora, who I'd worked with before, and Patrycja Kujawska to England to work to create Drop Dead Gorgeous. I met Patrycja as part of this mentoring programme that I'd been asked to facilitate in Gdansk. She was wearing a lace black dress, looking incredibly sexy, playing violin for a dancer called Raphael. I can't say his second name, as part of this same programme of new works that Aurora, who had made a solo, who I also mentored, was doing. And these are performers that you just see and you think, I've not seen anything like either of them before. And I was then in the mode of like being very instinctive. If I saw someone that I thought I could work with, I'd invite them over. And it turned out that they all belonged to this dance theatre company anyway, so we're used to working together. So they came to, we went to them and did a bit of a sharing, and they came to Leeds at Yorkshire Dance, and we started to create in earnest a piece called Drop Dead Gorgeous. Richard Loden had designed a set with my input before they arrived, which again I was interested in transformation, that the piece could start with a wall that could then get taken down to open up the space. And And that's what we created, a wooden stage with metal posts, with a wooden wall and 1.5 tons of slate, which kicked up a lot of dust and was incredibly painful to dance on. I wanted the space that we worked in to be completely inhospitable. It was drawn from images of Warsaw and Gdansk that I'd seen, where people were just living in rubble. The idea of the fence was that there were planks that could be metaphors for the carriages that millions of people were trekked off into the concentration camps. The planks opened so arms and limbs could come through. The wall then came down, leaving posts that people got tied to and that would reveal the rubble. The wall could be stood on, which I did as part of a balancing thing, a sort of tightrope walk, again alluding to the fragility of that experience and being on the fence. And then at the back of the space was a huge backdrop covered in black clothes that was again alluding to those awful piles of skulls and shoes and clothes that you see in the Holocaust museums or documentation of that time, where, as we know, millions and millions of people were slaughtered. So it's a very serious piece. I read a lot of Primo Levi, Drowned and the Saved, all of his works actually. And I looked into the Polish culture, the suffering at all of our hands, that culture existed. And I felt it. That's what's weird about being in Poland. You feel that history in your heart when you're walking around. And there's a sort of humility in that race that the Polish race, the Polish culture, that I find really, I'm so drawn to. And in those performers, actually, they're extraordinary performers, all of them. But even somewhere is a kind of questioning, a carrying of the darkness. One of the other reasons I was interested in working with these three performers is, again, everyone in the room brought something different into the mix. And Patrycja is an amazingly qualified, cultured violinist, but she's also a very humorous, very committed, emotionally connected performer. And so I knew I wanted to exploit her musical talent within the work as a forlorn string-based thread that could thread through this quite dark material that we were making. Leszek is much more of a physical presence, could match the other dancers in the room. And Aurora actually is trained in visual art, so she brings a different sensibility to the work, and has done since I've worked with her. So it's a combination of, again, different styles of movement in each person involved, including me as I was in it. An emphasis on partnering, but this was the biggest piece I'd made, I suppose, 6 performers on stage, a big set, a very heavy set to cart around. The set had depth and height. And again, the music was a combination, as it had been in Caravan of Lies, of found Polish folk music and Patrycja's violin and John Avery's compositions, and this set that I've described, which is was the 7th character, really. I mean, the set, again, transformed over time, gave us stuff to work with. We also decided for the first time to all wear high heels, the women, and I made that decision to make it even harder to dance on 1.5 tons of slate. And it was very risky. I mean, I've suffered for it. We've all suffered bodily for it since. But we wanted to find an image that was painful and bodily difficult, because the material that we were working with was so painful and full of death and destruction and difficulty. And so we sort of wanted to place our bodies in a position where we were experiencing just a minute amount of that. And there was a lot of falling, There's a lot of crashing onto stones. There's lots of stumbling around on high heels in stones. There was, in the devising process, we really pushed the boat out in terms of risk taking. Dealt with pornographic images of the 3 women that alluded to the rape camps that existed during the Second World War that aren't talked about that much. But one of the many atrocities was the abuse of women as sex objects within concentration camps for the gratification of the soldiers. I mean, we're dealing with those kind of topics as well as the carrying of multiple bodies to their deaths, as well as a larger comment from me about it's men that drive this, it's men that drive these atrocities, it's men that take us to war generally, and everybody suffers. Big themes, but we were trying in our small way to dig into some of them and find metaphors for and images for the things that were so shocking and disturbing about that time in history. And that still carry on today. I mean, those are themes that don't go away, unfortunately. Having Patrizia in the room with her violin offered an opportunity to mix up forms even further. So this wasn't being done at the time. It's become quite common-ish now. But we made a duet with TC and Patrizia, where Patrizia was playing the violin as part of the soundtrack, and they were moving together, integrated as a duet, again a duet form. And I'd not seen that done before, and it was an extraordinary breakthrough for us, which we then explored further in the next piece that we made together, and then abandoned actually because it became a bit gimmicky. But in terms of how dancing and moving with another body alters how you play as an accomplished musician was very interesting to us, and really brought the mixing of forms of music and movement together there in front of your face as a live thing. Drop Dead Gorgeous was quite a striking visual piece of work, as well as a highly physical piece with us throwing ourselves around on a ton of rocks. In the middle of making it, locked away in a studio in Yorkshire Dance in Leeds, we basically came out of the studio to hear that 9/11 had happened and the towers had fallen in New York, which was really bizarre because we were in our own little world creating clouds of dust in a studio. And it was kind of another atrocity that somehow infiltrated our process, not directly, but just as a thing that was in the air, the shock of that and the loss of life within that. And it was sort of a salient reminder that multiple lives are lost often, and we take it in our stride, but sometimes perhaps it's good just to clock what that means and how it sits with us as a society. Taking things forward from Drop Dead, we toured it a lot. We toured it to Italy, and they bought the wrong stones for us over there, and we all sliced our legs open because they were sharp instead of soft. We toured it somewhere else and performed on boulders. I mean, it was a bit ridiculous, really. We took it to Germany. Maybe it was Germany where they had the slicing stones. But anyway, we knackered our bodies making this piece, but we were all very committed to it because we felt like we were doing something different. And I would say that as an ensemble piece, because there was a larger cast of 6, a big set, really fantastic music, live music. In terms of the impact that Drop Dead had on the company's career, I think it was a marker. It was an eye-opener. It was what's Charlotte doing now? That's quite big. The subject matter's big. The performers are fantastic. The ensemble came together. They're all different and yet they cohere. Brilliant collaboration. I have very difficult but fond memories of that piece. What we also took forward was a working relationship with Patrizia, an ongoing relationship with TC, a reinforcement of the relationship with Aurora. And those are, the poles are still with me.